Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Make sure you like and subscribe on the video. Today we are discussing Nintendo and Palworld Pocket Pair lawsuit still going on, and Nintendo is doing anything and everything they can to destroy Palworld and Pocket Pair. This has been kind of swept under the rug. I don't see a lot of people talking about it, so here I am. I'm talking about it. This is absolute abuse of power, and we're about to find out.
Pocket Pair just confirmed what we all suspected, that the changes made last November were indeed motivated by Nintendo's lawsuit. Now, if you're out of the loop here, the update made pals spawn next to the player rather than spawning from
Which is dog shit, by the way.
balls. But today's story is not just the confirmation of that, it's also what happens next, because Pocket Pair are now saying that this is not the end. Even more changes are coming to the game, and not because they're changes that players really want to have made. Basically, Nintendo are very much still at it, and Pocket Pair have outlined how they're going to fight back. Thanks to reporting from the specialist outlet GamesFray, we now have some idea of how Pocket Pair plan to defend itself. Now, this comes from filings in February reviewed by GamesFray at the Tokyo District Court. Basically, the plan is to prove that Nintendo should have never been granted their patents in the first place, and this comes down to a pretty simple concept. So, Nintendo filed patents in December 2021 that have been iterated on after Palworld released. Now, those most recent patent updates were filed after Palworld came out, but they were right, extended from previously filed patents. Now, under patent law, that's allowed, where the principle is that the natural evolution of the patent under, like continued development should also be protected. But there's a natural counter to this, and that natural counter is called prior art. And prior art is what Pocket Pair intend to use. So the idea is that prior art existed before the original 2021 filing date, where the combination of two separate mechanics could reasonably give rise to the patent Nintendo holds. So as an example, everyone's pointed to the idea that Pocket Pair's previous game Craftopia also had a ball capture mechanic.
I'm actually I'm actually genuinely curious, right? Because I don't know enough about Japanese law to completely choose one side or the other. Um, so is there no laws in Japan that protect businesses from having monopolies? Because like here in the US, right? If you get a full monopoly over something, that is like the quickest way for you to end up having to make an appearance in front of Congress where they essentially just say, here's the changes that you have to make, and you don't have a choice. We've seen it now with Google, we've seen it with Apple, we've seen it with um, Visa and MasterCard. Um, they've all been brought in front of government officials and forced to sell things off, forced to uh, essentially spread out their product so that more uh, there could be competitors in the same space, essentially. So I'm just curious, like, does Japan not do this? Because like it seems common sense to me that if you have Pokemon buying up all these patents, registering all these patents to essentially make it a monopoly on this specific type of thing, that there needs to be laws in place that remove their rights to said patents that essentially make it a free market, you know, competitive space. I'm not following this because it's like the most dictator shit I've ever fucking seen in my life so far. Like everything from the Nintendo side of things. And that's why there's a meme about like Nintendo would patent air if they could. So then you couldn't have air in your game, or they'd patent water, or sweat. Like I don't know. It's just weird. It's weird to me that they allow this to happen. Like if I'm a Japanese government, if I'm the Japanese government, I'm looking at this situation because it is a high profile case, right? If Nintendo's involved, obviously it's high profile. So I'd be looking at this and saying, what is truly going on in this situation, right? You have you have Nintendo very aggressively acting on patents that it has filed, but maybe not updated to suit the need of Palworld or suit the need of uh, a free market, right? A lack of monopoly on a free market. So I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, they've been doing this quite a lot for several years. Is it founded or is it unfounded? And should we be acting on this in good faith? And if I'm a government official, I'm saying yes. I'm saying I'm looking at these files. I'm looking at um, what the motive is behind this stuff. Are they legally just trying to protect themselves, or are they trying to shut these different companies out of the market? Because it's not the first time that they have acted on this, and they have tried to stamp out any sort of. It's no different than, for example, Monster Energy. Monster Energy undermined Bang because Bang was entering the market. They were a good competitor with better ingredients, and they were absolutely destroying Monster on every metric. So Monster did what Monster could do, and they undercut them by hiring some fucking health officials to undermine Bang, driving their stock down, and eventually the parent company fell into bankruptcy, I think. And then by aggressively undermining the parent company of Bang and destroying them, they were able to then acquire Bang for pennies on the dollar. And that's why today you see hardly any Bangs anywhere, and you see all these fucking monster cans in almost every convenience store, dollar store, anywhere you could find a monster. But they did that on purpose because, yeah.
Now, Pocket Pair is not arguing that Craftopia alone means that Nintendo never should have been granted that patent, but by acknowledging Craftopia plus the influence of other existing games, the patented mechanic could be arrived at naturally through regular development processes, as opposed to, say, nabbing it from Nintendo and infringing upon their patent. Basically, as GamesFray puts it, when you add any of the following to Craftopia, you get to the same place that Palworld did and that they're accused of infringing Nintendo's design with. So let's just make that feel real by bringing in some actual other video games, right? So games like Rune Factory 5, Titanfall 2, and Pikmin 3 Deluxe all feature a character releasing monsters slash capture items in a direction by releasing a button. Yes, your Titan in Titanfall, I suppose, is a Pokemon. Jokes aside, you get the point though. Pikmin, Far Cry, and Tomb Raider all highlight that you have a variety of throwable objects as part of their mechanics. Meanwhile, then, you've got Pocket Souls, the mod for Dark Souls, Octopath Traveler.
I think that's okay to argue, but like it has to be a one for one. Like they have to essentially be doing the exact same mechanic that they were doing in Pal World. Um, if I was Pal World, I wouldn't have changed things so drastically. Uh, if I'm Pocket Pair, I'm looking at it and I'm finding a compromise position, right? So they were mad that they were using I think there was something about what was the last like major thing that hit the US was like they were suing them over like the use of a POW sphere, um, which I think is fucking retarded because there's games all over the place, both in the West and the East that use a spherical like capture device to capture creatures, right? Um, but there are some things that I wouldn't have. Essentially, what I'm saying is there's things that I wouldn't have changed. I would have simply said, "This is unlawful. I will not change this. I'm going to fight this." And um, here's such and such an example of exactly why you cannot just simply come after me for this. Because if you cared before, you would have cared. You would have. you would have cared when this game came out, when that game came out, when that piece of media came out, all using your mechanic that you supposedly patented but never went after them for. So, like, what's the difference, right? Because, like, obviously, um, the idea of using a device to capture a creature is not anything new. It's not like this new, all-inspiring thing. This has been around for I don't know how long at this point.
Traveler, and Final Fantasy, all showing that you can pick targets on a field with a visual representation of how successful you might be. Okay, so those are broad.
That see, this is what I want to clarify, right? Because like if you're going to use game examples, those game examples have to be a one for one. Like they have to be doing the same thing you're doing because that's like your ultimate defense, right? Because running around capturing something with a net versus throwing a ball from 30 yards out is two very different things. The base mechanic is the same. You're capturing a creature by using some sort of device. But if you're trying to make the argument that if they cared now, they should have cared before, then you have to have the picture perfect example. Even if it's not a ball, like say it's like a fucking capture cube or something or capture triangle, or
Examples, they're
pyramid.
varied examples. I guess there's also the example of the Pokemon GTA mod. But basically, it's no coincidence that Nintendo games find themselves present in these lists. Pocket Pair are basically banking on the validity of Nintendo's patents being granted as their main argument here, right? That they shouldn't have been granted, that is, that they're not valid. And the more that they can muddy the water around whether Nintendo should have them, the better the chance that the whole case gets thrown out.
I also think that Japan should have never allowed any sort of generalized mechanic or generalized patent to go through lawfully. I think those patents should be completely thrown out. They should be denied at all stakes because the minute you let people do that, you have an open season of basically nobody gets to do anything and you live a life of restriction. Because that would be like me going to a patent office and saying people can no longer use the word fuck. I'm going to patent the word fuck today. And then you can't use fuck anymore. Otherwise, you have to pay me money and I could sue you for it. It's the same concept, you know? It's like, oh, I'm going to patent, I'm going to patent balls. So you can't use a ball ever. Otherwise, you owe me money for it. It's too general of a thing. If it was like a very, very specific thing, like, I guess you could say, uh, what would be something that's like very specific? Do like a logo. A logo. Very easy example. So a logo is a very specific thing that specifically represents your brand. It doesn't get used in a general sense. It is completely specific to you, the individual business, right? And that's no different than Nintendo, right? Nintendo Switch. They probably patented the Switch because the Switch is specific to their business. It is not a generalized used item. But they didn't patent handhelds as a whole because it is too generalized. And that creates a monopoly over a market. So that's the difference, right? You can patent the Switch, but you can't patent handhelds as a whole because then Sony can't make one, Microsoft can't make one, Steam can't make one, Asus can't make one. It creates a monopoly, and that's the whole point of these type of patents to exist is to both respect and protect your business, but it also creates specific rules that allow other businesses to thrive in the same space.
Out. But there's a question to be asked of this situation. The Japanese lawsuit is ongoing, and these changes won't necessarily stop that right now. so why make them, right? Why would Pocket Pair do all of this whenever it might seem they're making some progress? Well, that's because they might not influence Japan, but they might have an impact on the potential American lawsuit. A fun situation's going down in
They filed one in the US as well.
the US. Many of them, in fact, but let's just stay in the patents for now. So, generally, whenever someone loses 22 out of 23 arguments, that's not really seen as victory, right? You'd think that, but it's not necessarily the case in patent law, and I've got some good news here. Game Phrase Explain It to Me Like I'm 5 series. That means that the rest of us can actually understand what's going on. And yes, thanks to them, because this stuff can be so goddamn dense. So, per their
True.
explainer, Nintendo have been making more moves in the US with applications to the US Patent and Trademark Office. Now, these take a while to resolve, so today's set of updates will range from starting back in 2022 through to February of 2025. And to simplify things, Gamefrey explained that Nintendo have been recently granted several patents by the office. Patent 1 relates to capturing a character in a field environment, so like any recent Pokemon game. Patent 2 is about players exchanging items, and Patent 3 is about using an aimed item to capture a fighting character.
Storage medium, storing game program, game system, game apparatus, and game processing method. Uh, in a first mode, an aiming direction in a virtual space is determined based on a second operation input. Um, and a player character is caused to launch in the aiming direction. An item that affects a field character disposed on a field in a virtual space based on a third operation input. Aiming direction is determined. Okay.
Field environment, so
Okay.
like any recent Pokemon game. Patent 2
Storage medium, storing game program, game system. Okay. Place designated by a player. Set recording operation input. An item or character that the player is to transmit. Apparatus for exchange is designated according to an operation input. So this is interesting. So I'm reading this, right? And as somebody who plays games, I could see myself understanding this, but I'm going to be honest. There's basically like 5% or less chance that a US patent office is going to understand what this is about. 100% they're going to read the first 3 fucking lines here and they're not going to fucking they're not going to get it. It's going to go whoop right over their fucking head. They're just going to like, all right, well, Nintendo wants a thing. Here you go. Sign it off, you know. Um so I would have never let this go through. I'm going to be honest with you. Never ever ever. Um because again, everything that is worded here is worded in a general sense. It is not specific to Pokemon. It is not specific to Nintendo. This is something that is used widely in a variety of games. So this type of stranglehold is exactly what you want to avoid to not create a monopoly because monopolies are illegal in the US, by the way.
is about players exchanging items, and Patent 3 is about using an aimed
In a first mode, an aiming direction in a virtual space is determined based on a second operation input, and a player character is caused to launch in an aiming direction. An item that affects a field character disposed on a field in a virtual space based on the third operation input. In a second mode, the aiming direction is determined based on the second operation input, and the player character is caused to launch in the aiming direction a fighting character that fights based on a third operation input.
item to capture a fighting character. Rather
Yeah.
obviously, all three of these could be applied to Palworld, with the latter two filed in 2022, while the first was filed in May 2024 after Palworld's release. Now, these are all matters of record, but they strengthen any case that Nintendo wants to make in the US about Palworld. And as for the losses, well, those losses are actually new. So 22 of the 23 losses came in the form of another application for a patent, this time a patent about writing objects in game. Game Freak reported this as having
On December 2024, Nintendo received a notice of final rejection from the patent examiner. Now, final is not literally final in terms of end of story.
being served a final rejection where, as part of the claims regarding the patent, Nintendo had 22 of their 23 claims be rejected. But it turns out you only really need one for it to be a problem. Now, that last claim only needed to be reworked for the
Amendments to the claims. Currently amended. A non transitionary uh, computer readable storage medium having stored therein a game program causing a computer and information processing apparatus to. Wow. They really did that, huh? They really allowed that.
patent to be granted. So Nintendo is very much not defeated in America, even though 22 of their claims for this patent, weren't accepted. And there's actually a lot Nintendo can do. They can appeal the decision, they can rework the claims in line with feedback, or they could even try to convince the patent examiner that some of the 22 rejected claims are valid. And that all seems like a lot of work just to try to toss one more patent on top of the pile that they're accumulating in the US. But it's Nintendo. They're mercs legally. And it's actually wider than just them. And that's not just my opinion. It's directly from the mouths of people who actually make the patent decisions, because they are huge business. In January of this year, we got to see things from the perspective of the people who actually file these lawsuits. Automaton reported on the, quote, importance of intellectual property rights in the games industry at Tokyo Esports Fiesta 2025. This was attended by Capcom, Nintendo, Sega, Konami, and Koei Tecmo. So Sega and Konami's representatives framed these mechanical patents in a way that was very explicit, that it's about incentivizing developers to make new systems and then protecting those systems from being stolen and recouping the high costs of developing games by licensing. And the latter part in particular was the real value of all of this work, rather than potentially risky or expensive lawsuits. But patents are also a significantly more useful tool to have than just copyright alone. Capcom's representative echoed Nintendo's with the idea that they can protect their brands, right, from infringement or damage via patents. And it's basically another tool in their arsenal, especially when brands are capable of skirting full copyright, but say can capture the spirit of a game. So for them, it's not necessarily, at least they frame it, about stamping out competition or punishing smaller teams for trying to innovate by iterating on other games. It's more about protecting what they have from other companies, big or small, not necessarily great. And that's why Nintendo, for an example, files patents for every mechanic in their games, regardless of the likelihood of them being granted. And it's that leaves the companies that breach those patents in hot water.
Yeah, it's a very aggressive business practice. It's like cutting somebody's legs out from under them before they have a chance to run, you know? Um, Essentially, that's what they're trying to do. It's a very aggressive policy. It's very consumer unfriendly, and it's very business unfriendly. All right. It does stamp out creativity as much as they want to pretend it doesn't. Um, because some of the best games that have ever been released have taken similar systems from games who already existed, and they have implemented them in a way that have made them absolutely astronomically more successful. The best example of this Well, let me think of something more recent because that'd be easier for people to. I mean, Power World is somewhat recent, but not really. Let me think of like what's come out recently. Maybe there's some connection I can make here. Oh, oh, Expedition 33. Expedition 33 uses a very like a JRPG metaphor refantagio style of combat. Uh, but they simply used a similar system, improved upon that system, and then established their own identity around said system. That's essentially what happened here. So if you want a good example, I don't know how this even escaped my mind for a second, but yeah, Expedition 33 is a perfect example of that. It was a similar exact combat system that you could argue is almost one for one, except that Expedition 33 changed theirs enough to be more dynamic and fulfilling in their game. And I think that's probably the best example I can come up with, other than Power World, obviously, ripping off of Pokemon to essentially implement a similar system, but improve upon it in their own style and fashion, which has always been a thing. It's been a thing. Pokemon wouldn't even have its fucking creatures if they didn't steal it from fucking what the hell is that fucking Dragon Quest? They wouldn't even have their creatures without Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest is the original when it comes to creatures existing in a video game medium that would be eventually capturable in balls that Pokemon eventually implemented into their games, right? So, that being said, this idea of systems and mechanics being patentable, I believe, is just it's just straight up nonsense. It's bullshit. It's too generalized. Um, it needs to be much more specific. Like the whole point of the patent system is to protect very specific things. And I do not believe that this falls into enough of a specified realm for a patent to be legally authorizable in this scenario, right?
Yes, in a way that can feel very direct and targeted, like what we've been talking about here, but also just in a systemic level, right? In that this is kind of how the system ends up working. They just make a point of filing patents for everything, right? Because they have then maximum coverage. That means, well, they can use those to further whatever ends they may have. And it's for that reason that, well, within Palworld, we're seeing all the fun business around gliding. In addition,
Furthermore, we regret to inform our players that with the implementation of patch version 0.5, okay, we must make yet another compromise. From this patch onward, gliding will be performed using a glider rather than with pals. Pals in the player. Okay. So this is going back on the last patent that we saw filed in the US office that essentially Nintendo's taking away the ability to use creatures to navigate worlds, um, or attempting to anyway. How that even passes, and this is why I say that the patent offices don't understand what the fuck's going on here, because they probably never played a video game in their fucking life, and that leaves the decision of whether a patent passes or fails to a third party, which could be very detrimental to whether you can trust that third party to make an objective decision on whether something is patentable or not. So I have my doubts on the patent office on their ability to perceive these failures. of overgeneralized mechanics that essentially Pokemon is trying, or not Pokemon, but Nintendo is trying to take away from everybody. Because my question is right, because Palworld is not the first game to use a creature kept in your inventory uh, to navigate an open world. That this is not new. Like this has been a mechanic used since fucking uh, this is like the very first iteration of Pokemon, Pokemon Red. You know, like this has been around since that time. So why now? You know, if I'm a law office, I'm saying why are you suing now when you should have sued a long time ago, like a long time ago, because there has been several games that have used these mechanics of which you are now currently pushing patents or pushing patent infringement on. Yeah, I just don't.
To the fact that the pals now spawn beside you instead of out
It's clearly targeted. I mean, let's be honest. It's clearly targeted.
of a ball. But okay,
As much as they want to claim otherwise, this is clearly a targeted action because otherwise they would have already been pursuing this for several other companies.
now that we've explored a lot of the situation,
But they won't. You know why they won't? Because the other companies are Sony, the other companies are Microsoft, the other companies are um I was trying to think of another one, but I can't right now. But the two like major competitors would be Sony and Microsoft. And Nintendo is not about to get into a patent war with Sony and Microsoft because they have the resources to fight back. And this is why it looks really fucking bad for Nintendo because they're going after Pocket Pair, which do not have the resources to go up against a multi fucking billion-dollar corporation or multi-million, I don't know where they're at, like Nintendo.
let's bring it all together. First off, this is not going to be resolved quickly. That's just not how this stuff goes.
No, they're gonna drag it out because they know the more they drag it out, the less Power World can actually fight back because eventually. So if I'm Power World, if I'm Pocket Pair, if I'm Pocket Pair, I'm trying to put as little resource into the lawsuit bullshit as possible, and I am looking to innovate the game heavily and get it pushed. I want that shit to be everywhere. And then the other thing I would do if I'm Power World is I would say goodbye Japan and I move my ass to fucking to the United States. It's a crazy fucking move. But basing Pocket Pair in the United States and fighting them in US law under US public fucking scrutiny is going to be much easier than fighting them in Japan where the society and the whole pressures of it all would be completely different. Because let's be honest. Japan is a PvE server. The US is a PvP server. Like it would be brutal for Nintendo to try to fight them here if they were home based in the United States. That's just a fact. That's just a fact. But obviously, that's a very like far cry from, what their current, objectives are, I'm sure. But that's what I would do. I would just aggressively be making moves to make it as hard as possible on Nintendo. Essentially, I'm trying to waste Nintendo's resources as much as possible. Like they are going to drag it out for me, so I am going to make it as difficult as possible for them to continue making these actions. Cuz like they're clearly aggressive and targeted and they would be I would understand more from where I'm sitting and I wouldn't even be making these claims if there were several like instances of this in the past where Nintendo was going after Sony or they're going after Microsoft or they're going after, somebody who could essentially drag it on as much as they could. Then I would say, you know what, this is something that Nintendo is consistent about. They're very, very aggressive when it comes to this specific thing because they haven't allowed any other major corporation to gain traction with this same mechanic, but they haven't. This is the first time because they have done it like in the past, but that was for very different reasons, and it was with like some Chinese company that was clearly just absolutely ripping off Pokemon and making games with their literal IP. That makes sense to me. That I don't care about. They clearly fucked up, but I'm also not surprised because it's fucking China. Um, but this is a different story. This is clearly an equal footing competitor that has entered the space that Nintendo wants to demolish before their next dog shit Nintendo 3DS Pokemon level of game comes out. Because I don't know if you guys have seen, but the trailer was very underwhelming for Pokemon Z-A, and it's supposed to be on the new Switch, but it looks like it was for the 3DS. Like the lamps are like hexagonal and shit. And I was like, what kind of world do we have like -2 FPS bushes? Like like the whole I want them to innovate. I want them to make Pokemon games better. And it seemed like for a minute there they were going to start doing it. And then you had fucking uh Scarlet and Violet come out and they were like two of the worst Pokemon games I think I've ever played in my life. Like what are we doing?
And especially if these lawsuits expand to the US or further afield. Pocket Pair is clearly planning to take Nintendo on to the best of their ability here, despite Nintendo's legendary.
Yeah, like I said, if I'm Pocket Pair, I'm putting as little amounts to fighting these lawsuits as possible, and I am cranking out new content for that fucking game and advertising like a motherfucker. I want everybody talking about Palworld. Like I want Palworld to be under everybody's banner, and they did do some interesting things where um when the lawsuits were starting to reach its peak, that's when they had their announcement with Sony. And it was it a I was trying to remember like what the event was that they showed off like that they're coming to PlayStation and all that stuff. That's the type of shit that you need to be doing. Like if I'm Pocket Pair, that's what I'm trying to do. Like I'm putting my effort into that and I'm saying this is crazy. Like like it, essentially like that I'm trying to figure out like that what's the best way to say it? If I'm Pocket Pair, I'm trying to make Palworld undeniable. That's the best way to say it. That right there is the best way to say it. Unforgettable, undeniable. That's what I'm going for. That's what I'm trying to make Palworld embody because that throws yet another wrench into Nintendo's plans on getting their stuff taken care of. Because when it comes to resources, obviously Pocket Pair doesn't hold a candle to Nintendo, but they can influence a lot if they can get the public to see their side from a better perspective.
Legal track record. I mean, legendary. All of their lawyers are John Wick type people. So, if they can win, it will be a brilliant David and Goliath story. But with companies like Capcom and Sega very happy to explain that these patents are part and parcel of game development now, it's not necessarily going to be an earth shattering change.
Now, I do think that there will be some like government involvement that will need to take place because you can't be allowing these companies to put these patents on record because that does stifle creativity. It does stifle the free market. It does create monopolies. Um, and you literally just can't allow that to be a thing. You can't because every single one of the patents that we went through earlier were very much not specific enough to be considered a proper lawful patent, in my opinion. They're too generalized. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not in Japan. I don't know what kind of laws and regulations that they have enough for me to definitively say that Power World is correct or Nintendo is correct. But from where I'm sitting and from what I know, it definitely seems like an overreach, uh, and a system that is maybe just a little bit broken that could be amended to prevent such actions in the further, distant future.
Either. It's not going to be a case where Pocket Pair could win and then standards and all sorts of things in the industry would change. No, not really. The system's too big, there's too much money in it, and realistically speaking, like so many things, it inherently does favor the incumbents because guess what? They actually have got the resources to do all of these patent filings, right?
Right.
They actually have the resources to do those things. That means that, say, if everyone was to have an equal quantity of patentable innovation, who are the people who would be most able to act on that opportunity by using their resources? Is it the small little indie team, or is it the company with a humongous legal department? It's obviously the latter, and that's how it inherently plays in the favor of the incumbents. That's why the likes of your Capcoms, your Segas, etc., are all happy to talk about how this is an important part of modern game development. Big happy smiles. I suppose we'll just have to see what happens to PALs next. But anyway, as fun as all this is, if you want to get the lowdown on a very spicy new business model of, hey, just licensed branded expansions.
Yeah, just license everything. That's why the meme exists that Nintendo would patent Air if they could. But good video. I love the video. I do think that this is something that needs to be kept up with, uh, and people need to keep their eyes on because it does change the dynamic of a lot of different things. Because yeah, once it starts, it doesn't stop. It's like Pandora's box. Like you open it, you can't close it again. Like it's done. Like we're going down a crazy path, and there's going to be a lot of fallout from it. That's why this is why I want younger people in the government, by the way, because old fogies got no fucking idea what the hell's going on here. They don't know. They could read all those patents and they just be, oh, some stupid fucking game shit, whatever. Fucking pass, deny, pass, which could have inverse effects depending on what those patents are, obviously. Because maybe some of those patent filings that they did in the US were fair and they were specific and they were very much trying to protect certain systems and things that Nintendo has innovated and created. Um, but if that's the case, then they have every right to protect those things. But if the person reviewing the patent and Nintendo does put in a lawful patent, if the person reviewing it doesn't understand it, they could reject it for no other reason other than the fact that they're just ignorant to the whole fucking situation. So I don't know. There's so many different like aspects to this that could be involved that could create these different scenarios. So it is something to keep an eye on. Something to keep in mind. That's all I'm saying. Make sure you guys go to his channel, give him a sub, give him a like. I always love reacting to these different videos and stuff, but make sure you guys are giving them engagement por favor. Other than that, I'm gonna get out of here. I got some more stuff I gotta do, and then maybe we'll find some more videos to get recorded for the day. But other than that, I appreciate you all. Catch you later. Peace.